Connecticut, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I come to the floor today to talk about America's #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly and the #1 anti-poverty program for children. That program is Social Security, our nation's #1 insurance plan. And currently, it's under siege. Both Senator Wyden and President Biden have, I think, rightly said that what this amounts to is a buzzword for cuts to Social Security, a fiscal commission that's designed to have backroom meetings without hearings, unamendable, and yet bring to both floors of the House and Senate an up or down vote, put together by 16 people, 4 who have no vote, and 6 from the Senate, 6 from the House, only 7 votes required to pass a bill that goes directly to the floor for a vote. That is an abomination and derelict of duty on behalf of the House and the Senate, and I strongly oppose it. It's been 53 years since Congress has enhanced Social Security. These are your brothers and sisters, your family members, your neighbors, the people you go to church with. This money comes directly back to every single congressional district and your community and goes to help people. The average Social Security check is $18,000 for a male, $14,000 for a female, and there are 5 million of our fellow Americans who get below poverty level checks from the government, below poverty level checks, because Congress hasn't taken the responsibility. We have a plan to change that. We put our plan out on the floor. Contrast that with a behind closed door study. How about we do something for the American people like vote, Mr. Speaker? Vote on something that is essential to their livelihood. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, Social Security isn't just a pension plan. More veterans rely on Social Security disability than they do on the VA, and it's spousal and dependent coverage as well that we're providing. Even President Trump has gone so far as to criticize Nikki Haley and say, hey, listen, this idea of raising the age, which the Republican Study Committee calls for, is cutting benefits in Social Security. You listen to Donald Trump on everything else. Let us hope that you understand in what he's talking about here in terms of gutting Social Security and causing across-the-board cuts to a vital program that every single American needs. Mr. Speaker, there are also more than 28 million Americans who the only benefit that they have in retirement will be Social Security. It is an outrage that this body in the House and in the Senate have not taken up Social Security, both to improve its solvency and also to enhance its benefits. We have a program that does that, a 2% across-the-board increase for everyone, lifts 5 million Americans out of poverty who've paid into a system all their lives and get below poverty level checks from the government because of Congress inaction. It repeals WEP and GPO for teachers and firefighters and municipal employers. It will provide a tax break for more than 23 million Americans. And it does so by simply lifting the cap on people over $400,000. And what does that do? It pays for all of these benefits and also extends solvency well into the future. That's what we should be doing as a body. We don't need to study Social Security. We know what.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner. Thank you so much for your candor
It's always refreshing, giving the enormous responsibility that you have, and just how important revenue is for the functioning of our government. That's why, of course, we were very much alarmed when this committee voted to cut $80 billion out of funding to the IRS. What kind of an impact would a cut like that have, especially at this time when we're concerned about the federal deficit? What kind of a cut would that have, especially, you've articulated very well, trying to keep pace with all the technological changes that you're going to, while at the same time humanizing the IRS through your call centers and the ability for people to have direct contact with a human being.
Yeah, I mean, between our budget was cut year over year between 2010 and 2022. If you add all that up, it's a 25% cut. Our staffing size shrunk to the same size it was in the 1970s. But over those same 12 years, the tax system grew and got a lot more complicated, and we have a lot more to do. Tens of millions of more filers, thousands of changes to the tax codes, new programs, new activities, and a very different world. You know, a gig economy where we used to not have a gig economy, and more global globalization, movement of money, new currencies. And it's just a dramatically different world. So when you take those two together and you underinvest over a period of 12 years, while at the same time the job to manage the tax system grows, it's not a good formula. It leads to underperformance. And what I'm trying to emphasize here is the people that suffer are taxpayers. They suffer because the tax laws still exist. They still have these responsibilities, and it's a stressful experience. And when a problem emerges, if they can't get clarity from the IRS, if they can't get through to us, if they can't get their tax issue resolved, it weighs on them, it's burdensome for them, and it's stressful for them. And that's what's so heartbreaking about an underfunded tax agency. It means that we're not answering the phone. It means that our walk-in centers are shuttered, and it means that our digital tools are stagnating. And that's what it means when you describe, let's pull back the IRS funding. It means that the IRS won't be able to function and help you. And if you're not pulling back the tax laws and the tax responsibilities, but you're pulling back the ability for the IRS to serve taxpayers, then the ultimate harm is to the taxpayers themselves. And that's my impassioned plea to make sure that we don't harm taxpayers by making it harder for the IRS to help them.
I think you've articulated that very well. What I'm interested in as well is, because of the sophistication as we go forward, what is the IRS up against when you're dealing with major corporations or people with great wealth? What does it look like inside the IRS when you're dealing with a battery of attorneys, accountants, and consultants that are going up against government employees?
Well, I start with the volume, right? When you look at the number of audit personnel we had the day the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, versus the number of the highest wealth filers in the United States. And I'm not talking about just above 400,000. I'm talking about the millionaires, the corporations with $250 million in assets. We break it into cohorts. And at the moment the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, we had one auditor for every 150 of the wealthiest taxpayers in the U.S. And these tax returns are long and complicated, thousands of pages, sometimes hundreds of thousands of pages. So I like people to picture that one IRS auditor or examiner backing in 150 truckloads of paper saying, I'll review all that, that's my job. So it's a real volume challenge. So we had to hire more personnel, to evaluate these returns, but also the complicated financial structures, the introduction of new currencies, the more movement of money into international tax jurisdictions, the proliferation of tax havens. All of it, we have to keep up with it. Exactly. It's an investment that we have to make in our subject matter expertise, It's investment that we have to make in our analytics and our predictive modeling, because here's the other issue. If we don't invest smartly, we just start pulling audits, we're going to end up pulling audits from people that are following the laws more regularly and then adding burden to them when they're doing what they're supposed to do. So precision is actually very important here, and you have to invest to get that precision.
Mr. Chairman, I think we should do a hearing at some point, too, on what artificial intelligence means and what it will mean to our agencies, especially those that are guarding our privacy issues as well. But thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner. Thank you for your integrity and your candor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to speak about the nation's #1 insurance program, Social Security. It has been that way since Franklin Delano Roosevelt first introduced it, and continues to be the #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly, and frankly, Madam Speaker, the #1 anti-poverty program for children. And yet Congress has been derelict in its duty. There has not been a vote to enhance Social Security since 1971. Richard Nixon was President of the United States. As we speak today, there are close to 70 million Americans who rely on Social Security. Of those 70 million, it's important to understand that 10,000 baby boomers a day become eligible for Social Security. More than 5 million of our fellow Americans have worked and paid into a system and get below poverty level checks from their government, the wealthiest in the world, with the nation's #1 anti-poverty program that this body has not acted on in more than 50 years. It's long overdue that we take the initiative and have a vote in the United States Congress that will help the American people. Social Security is bedrock, and whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, you understand this. Now, our colleagues on the other side have put forward something they call a study commission. We don't need to study Social Security. We know what needs to be done, but to have a study that goes behind closed doors, has an up or down vote that's unamendable, with no input from this body, is absurd and anti-democratic and anti-elderly and children from the standpoint of the havoc that it would wreak on this system. The idea that they're doing this to save Social Security is a fallacy. They're doing it so they can go behind closed doors and cut the very program that sustains so many Americans. More than 40% of all Americans who are on Social Security, this is the only pension benefit that they will have. And Madam Speaker, you know as well as I that it's not only a pension benefit, it's a disability benefit, as well as taking care of spouses and children. And imagine, for our viewers in the audience, Congress hasn't taken a vote in more than 50 years for the nation's #1 anti-poverty program. It's long overdue that we not study this. How about we do what we're elected to do by the public and actually vote? And if you got a better idea, put it out there. But we believe this as well. I commend President Biden for saying, and look, the way that we're going to pay for this is to lift the cap, or what's called scrap the cap, on people making over $400,000. This past month marked that millionaires have already stopped paying into the Social Security program. Bill Gates stopped paying back in January. That is wrong, it's not right, but to lift that cap will allow us not only to extend the solvency of Social Security, but increase benefits across the board for its members, to make sure that WEP and GPO, which have hurt teachers and municipal employees over the year, is finally scrapped. To have in there a tax cut for more than 23 million Americans who continue to pay taxes on their Social Security, and to make sure that everyone's benefits are enhanced. And where does that money go, Madam Speaker? The money from Social Security goes right back into every single congressional district, and it allows those individuals in that district to sustain themselves. Nobody's going out and buying stock options with Social Security 2100. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back my time and thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman.
Mr. Speaker, I'm also here to discuss, though, Social Security. As you know, Mr. Speaker, more than 70 million Americans are on Social Security and receive it, and yet Congress, Mr. Speaker, has not acted since 1971 to enhance and improve anything about Social Security. For the people in our audience today, they've got to be scratching their heads and saying, what is this? Why is it? And for 40% of all people on Social Security, it's the only pension benefit that they have. And every day, 10,000 fellow Americans become eligible for Social Security, and Congress has not voted to enhance Social Security in more than 50 years. It's long overdue. We have a proposal not to cut Social Security, not to raise the age. For every year you raise the age for Social Security, that's a 7% cut in benefits. How does it make any sense to say people are living longer, so we ought to raise the age so they can receive less the older they get? That makes no sense. It's long overdue for Congress to take the steps and do what it should do. All the American people are asking is that we vote on their interests to increase Social Security that hasn't been done since 1971, to make sure that teachers and firefighters and police officers see that WEP and GPO is repealed and paid for, and they get the benefits that they have been denied. To make sure that people who are working currently and receiving Social Security don't pay tax on that Social Security. Those are the things that we need to do to improve this program, the #1 insurance program in the country. The #1 program that prevents both the elderly from being impoverished and also prevents children from being impoverished. Only in Congress do people sit here day after day and not take up the most important thing they can do on behalf of the American people to improve their lot in life. As important as basketball championships are, that kitchen table discussion about what are we going to do, honey, and why hasn't Congress voted to make sure that we get a cost of living increase that actually reflects the cost of things today that we have to encounter? 1971, Richard Nixon was President of the United States, the last time that Congress voted to enhance the nation's #1 insurance program. It's long overdue, Mr. Speaker, that Congress step up and make sure that we take these votes that will help every single American. With that, I yield back my time.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning to address a pertinent issue for all Americans, that being Social Security. Mr. Speaker, as you know, it's been more than 50-plus years since Congress, the only body that can, has taken action to enhance Social Security. What becomes even more confounding, Mr. Speaker, is that with 10,000 baby boomers a day becoming eligible for Social Security, Congress has not acted to enhance this program. I was talking to my good friend Jody Arrington the other day and reminding him that in his district in Texas, for example, he has 128,000 Social Security recipients and 90,000 retirees, 9,000 children, almost 10,000 widows, 4,679 spouses, and 14,000 plus disabled workers. They haven't received a benefit enhancement in more than 50 years. And Social Security has nothing to do with the debt or deficit. It's an earned benefit. It's fully paid for. And the increases that we're calling for, well, the president said it best. We're going to pay for those by lifting the cap on 400,000. You could have people in the audience, for example, raise their hand if they're making more than 400,000. I doubt that you would find any. It's about 0.6%, but most people are astounded to learn that there's a cap and they haven't paid anything into the system, a system that all Americans pay into. For example, Mr. Speaker, in Tennessee, you have in the Tennessee's 8th District, 189,000 of your citizens receive Social Security benefits. 136,000 of them are retirees, 25,000 disabled people, 4,000 spouses, and the list goes on. And here's the most important thing. Your district gets $330 million monthly that goes into your district. Now, I say this to my colleagues and good friends on the other side of the aisle who are always talking about economic development. What better economic development tool is there than for your citizens to get a payment? Nobody gets wealthy on Social Security. They haven't had an increase in more than 50 years, and this money would go right back into your district and be spent at the local grocery store, at the pharmacy, at the dry cleaners, to pay for rent or a mortgage or put gas in your automobile. The money all comes back, and Congress hasn't acted in over 50 years. Mr. Arrington says, at least he says this about Social Security 2100, the bill that we have put forward that enhances benefits across the board by 2%, that repeals WEP and GPO. You realize, Mr. Speaker, that there are more than 23 million Americans who pay taxes on their Social Security. You guys are quick to make sure that there's tax relief for billionaires. How about people who are actually working for a living and then have to pay double taxation on their Social Security? 23 million Americans. There are 5 million Americans who get below poverty level checks from the federal government, from Social Security, even though they've paid in all their quarters. Why? Because Congress hasn't taken action. The only body that can. The president can't do this through executive order. The Supreme Court isn't going to act. We need to act on a bill. And as Representative Arrington says, well, I don't agree with Larson's bill. I said, well, what don't you agree with? If you got a better idea, put it forward. At least he's honest enough to say, yeah, we don't have a plan. We haven't written anything down on paper. The American people not only need a plan, what they need is help and relief in this time of global inflation. In this time that's coming forward, it's long overdue for Congress to act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Mr. Larson, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your remarks. And I want to thank our panelists. It's not often that we get the Walter Cronkite of actuaries that's here, and so I'm pleased that we're going to hear straightforward talk. But let's cut to the chase. Congress has not done its job in over 50 years. We have not enhanced this program so that your constituents are better served. On average, every single one of our districts receives more than $200 million monthly to people that are on Social Security. It is arguably probably the best economic development plan that we have. And where do they spend that money? They spend it right back in the district. I can't help but get upset when you think about the fact that 10,000 baby boomers a day become eligible for Social Security. And they look and say, well, what's happened? Why hasn't Congress acted? We have a proposal that's out there. What Congress needs to do is something the public expects from us. Vote. You got a plan? We have a plan. We're happy to put our plan up for a vote. What's yours? What we hear is $1.5 trillion in cuts to Social Security? That's your idea of saving Social Security? Raising the age of Social Security recipients. The American public knows for every year you raise the age, that's a 7% cut in benefits. So the opening remarks of the chairman are that we're in dire straits. We'll see 20% plus cuts by 2033 if Congress does nothing. So your proposal is, well, let's do something. Let's make those cuts now by raising the age and cutting it 21% up front. It's long overdue to stop all of the dialogue, and how about vote? How about put out your plan, do what the people have asked us to do. Everybody agrees that there's a crisis, that there's a need here. So what do we get elected to do? I don't know how people go home and look themselves in the mirror and understand that there is 5 million of your fellow Americans that get below poverty level checks from Social Security. More than 70 million people, or close to 70 million people now, who rely on Social Security. 40% of them, it's the only benefit they have. And you, Congress, with the responsibility of changing that, do nothing. You don't vote. That's what we need more than anything else. Aside from laying out the numbers and getting the news, good and bad, then the question is, how do you solve the problem? Cutting Social Security doesn't solve the problem. It exacerbates it. You mean to tell me that things haven't changed in 53 years? Not having a COLA that works, having 5 million plus people who've paid into a system get below poverty level checks? What do you have against giving 23 million Americans a tax cut? These are the hardworking. You guys are going to work overtime to make sure that millionaires and billionaires get their tax cut. But the average working person, 23 million Americans that will get a tax cut if this Congress were to act, you don't care about. So whether it's a tax cut, whether it's getting benefits to the point where they're livable for people, and making sure that no one can retire into poverty, and repealing WEP and GPO and paying for it. Thank God for President Biden saying, hey, let's pay for this. Let's have people who pay nothing or next to nothing, millionaires and billionaires, just pay their fair share
of what the guy making 50 or 30,000 a year has to pay all year long. You know what that does? It both allows us to extend the benefits and also allows us to extend the solvency. The choice is yours. If you've got a better idea, put it out there. But it seems like the only idea is to cut Social Security by $1.5 trillion and to cut people's benefits by raising the age 21% across the board. I yield back.
Thank you. I now have the pleasure of introducing our witnesses for the day. Stephen Goss is the chief. Mr. Smucker, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I refer to something Mr. Larson said. I'm not even sure where to start here. There's a lot to talk about. This has been a great conversation. A few things I want to mention, I think. Mr. Goss, you had responded in an answer to a question from Mr. Kustoff about the commission or the deal in '83 and talked very positively about that, really people coming together and resolving this, putting everything on the table and making it solvent for years to come. We could do that again, right? And we should do that.
Absolutely. We're much looking forward to that.
Yeah, and I'd like to suggest to Mr. Larson and others who I think are sincere about the desire to fix Social Security. There's a difference between proposing a bill that doesn't go anywhere and having a real bipartisan discussion about resolving this. And so I guess I'd like to suggest the fiscal commission that we had recommended that looks at both debt and Social Security really is an attempt to do that. And I know you've spoken out.
Would the gentleman yield?
Let me finish my sentence, and I'll be happy to. I know you've spoken out against that, and I'm telling you in all sincerity that I think that we could resolve this if we had that kind of conversation with the American people. We could do what has been done in '83, and we could take your bill and others and put them together and really resolve this for the American people. I can tell you that I'm certainly interested in doing that. People on our side are interested in doing that, and we're willing to put everything on the table. And so, yes, I'll yield.
So what is it you're putting on the table, number one? And there are many Social Security proposals that exist out there, not just Social Security 2100. But also, there's a big difference between the Greenspan Commission and the commission that was proposed behind closed doors with only a select group of people with a decision that would require only an up or down vote. That is, that's not a democratic, let's sort through this, let's have this exposed to the public, let's go through this, and let's put all those discussions on the table. And I totally agree with you that people like yourself and others are very sincere about this, except the proof is in the pudding.
So and I'll take my time because I'd love to get to a lot more here, but I would love to continue to have that discussion. I would love to not just get a no on that, because I can tell you we're sincere about it and we could put everything on the table to try to solve this. I do want to, on your point on the debt. So very briefly, so that people understand this, initially, when Social Security was put in place, we were taking in more money coming in than was going out, correct? When did that change? When did Social Security no longer begin to receive more money annually than they were paying out? Mr. Goss?
Well, most recently, that has occurred in 2010. It was expected to be in 2020 at the time of the '83 amendments, but because of some of the changes
since 2010, we've been paying out more than we've been taking in.
Exactly.
And within 9 years, the difference, the trust, which was the difference that has been accumulating over time, that has been borrowed and is being paid back, in 9 years, that expires, right? That is gone. We no longer have excess funds. Am I right on that?
On a combined basis, maybe 10 years, on that order.
So at that point, unless something changes, people will no longer get all of their Social Security benefits because we don't have money to pay it, correct?
Under current law, we
Yes.
cannot pay what's not in the fund.
Or if at that time Congress decides to make it up, by taking on additional debt, that's a choice we could make, right? We could continue to pay benefits if nothing has changed by taking on additional debt and paying for those benefits.
Unprecedented, but anything is possible.
But at that point, it would add to the debt, right?
If Congress were to change the law and say that we will borrow from the public in order
The
to,
only point I'm making, and I'd love to have more conversation about this publicly, that's why we need a commission to talk about this, is that this will contribute. There's a fundamental problem. We have far less workers than we do retirees. That ratio is far different. And so we need more workers. By the way, I agree with Ms. Sanchez, who I don't often agree with, on immigration. It is something that's a partial solution here. We need a lot more workers. We should be talking about legal immigration. But it's a great conversation. I wish others would agree that we need to continue to have this conversation. This is how I think a commission could work. We would take this conversation across America. We would begin to have a real understanding of the facts and how they exist. We just can't have that conversation in 5 minutes each here. I only get 4 if I give some to you, but I'd love to continue this conversation. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence of time here.
Thank you, Mr. Smucker. Next, we'll go to our dear friend from the great state of Illinois, Mr. for his questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. And yeah, I almost don't know where to start, but basically, when I listen to the chairman speak, it's that, hey, you folks out there who are depending on Social Security, look, you already get enough. And for God's sake, what we don't want to do at all costs is make sure that billionaires pay their fair share, because that would be, and then hypothetically, what would happen? Dr. Swagel, has the general fund ever been used to pay for Social Security?
I don't.
And so it's never been used, but hypothetically, that's what we're using here to try to say to the American public that somehow this is part of it contributes to the debt and deficit. That is total BS. Now, let me ask a couple of questions here. Mr. Goss, if we were to raise the retirement age by 3 years, as has been proposed, what would that mean in terms of cut to benefits if we went from 67 to 70?
it would depend on how rapidly we did this, but at the point at which we had the retirement age raised by the 3 years, as you'd indicated earlier, that reduces retirement benefits, monthly benefits, and lifetime benefits by about 6.5% to 7% for each year that we raise. So an additional 3-year increase in the normal retirement age would in fact lower benefits by on the order of 20%.
Now, Mr. Goss, also, because we heard this question as well, what percentage of income does someone who makes $1 billion in wages contribute to Social Security?
Well, given that the most they're going to pay is their 6.2%, they and their employer on the first $168,600, I think the number comes out for a billionaire, for somebody with $1 billion of earnings, to about 0.1% of their total wages paid by them, and another 0.1% paid by their employer.
And what is a person making? What percentage is a person making $50,000 pay?
Well, they would pay their 6.2% by themselves, and their employer matching that.
So again,
with another
because we want to
6.2.
protect these billionaires and millionaires, it's unconscionable to think about the fact that they ought to pay their fair share, that they ought to be in a position where, as President Biden points out, if they do, we extend the solvency of the program for 66 years and we're able to add on benefits. I have another question that comes up because this happens frequently on the trail. Can you talk about how Social Security actually doesn't contribute a penny to the national debt?
Yes, be happy to. As I think everybody here is very well aware, Social Security has its trust funds, and the trust funds can only have positive balances. Social Security now has and never has had the ability to borrow from the general fund of the Treasury. That is in the current law. Anything could change in the future. But currently, Social Security can only hold asset reserves. And as a result, with a roughly $34 trillion of total federal debt we have now, Social Security is actually covering approximately $3 trillion of that and not needing to be borrowed from the public at the moment. So Social Security can only really help service some of the debt that the rest of the government develops. It does not contribute towards the debt.
So for the general public to understand this, it's called a trust fund for a reason. And that trust fund has not been tapped into, nor will it ever be tapped into unless members of Congress have a different idea and want to change it. And they could through a vote if they decided that this is the tack they want to take. But the fact of the matter is, and it is a fact, that it doesn't contribute to the debt or deficit. And what aggravates people the most is they pay into this. So does their employer, but their employer gets a tax write-off. 23 million Americans get double taxed under current Social Security programs, and we as a body are the only ones that can change that. And instead, we don't put forward proposals that direct making the system both solvent and enhancing benefits because people desperately need this money. 40% of our fellow Americans is the only thing they have. 28 million Americans.
Gentleman's time has expired. We'll now move to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Speaker Ross. I rise this morning, or early afternoon, to talk about the nation's #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly and the #1 anti-poverty program for children, and the program that provides more disability benefits to our veterans than the VA. I'm talking about Social Security, Mr. Speaker, and this might be news to some of the viewers in our audience and at home, but Congress has not acted to enhance Social Security in more than 53 years. Richard Nixon was the President of the United States the last time Congress acted on this much-needed benefit, the #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly and the #1 anti-poverty program for children. Instead, what we find is our colleagues on the other side, the Republican Study Commission, has said that what we need to do is cut Social Security by $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. In the process, Speaker Ross, what they've done also is said that, yes, and initially what we need to do is to, well, raise the age of people. What they don't tell the recipients is for every year you raise the age, that's a 7% cut in benefits. So what they've proposed is a 21% across-the-board cut to Social Security. My good friend Jody Arrington, chairman of the Budget Committee, and the Budget Committee meets this week, and I hope they get to explore the myths regarding Social Security. It has nothing to do with the debt or the deficit of this country. And the actuary, the chief actuary, will lay that out. Speaker Ross, you might be surprised to know that in your district there's over 179,000 recipients. In your district, that brings in $306 million monthly. And where do they spend that money, Mr. Speaker? Right back in your district. They go to the pharmacy, they go to the grocery store, they put gas in their tank, they pay their rent, they pay their mortgage, and they haven't had an increase since 1971. It's long overdue for Congress to act. The president has put forward a proposal. Democrats have a proposal. All we need to do is vote. If you got a better idea, for all means, put it out there. But if you don't, at least allow a vote to take place so you can minimally help out the people in your district. On average, every member of Congress gets more than $200 million monthly that comes into your district.
There's no better economic development plan for people in your district because of where they're going to spend that money. Nobody gets wealthy on Social Security. The average for a male is $18,000, for a female is $14,000, and for more than 5 million of our fellow Americans, they get below poverty level checks from the wealthiest nation in the world. You're out proposing cuts for the very wealthy, the top 1%. And won't even take care of the 5 million people who have paid into a system and get below poverty level checks. And while we're speaking of tax cuts, as Mr. Arrington, I noted to him, how about the 23 million Americans that will receive a tax cut under the Democratic plan? How about we look at working Americans and give them a tax cut in their retirement instead of double taxing them on Social Security? 23 million Americans will benefit directly from this program that we've put forward. President Biden has said that we'll pay for this as well by lifting the cap on people making over $400,000. Now, to understand this, as Linda Sanchez said in the committee the other day, for those expensive professional football or baseball players, for a baseball player, he's done paying Social Security after his first at bat, while the rest of America continues to pay into the system. But there are several millionaires and billionaires who circumvent the law completely and pay nothing into Social Security. While meanwhile, those men and women who defend this nation, the firefighters, the police officers, and the school teachers, many of whom have been double victimized by weapon GPO. We repeal weapon.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to talk about the nation's #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly and the #1 anti-poverty program for the nation's children. That's Social Security, Mr. Speaker, and I'm here today to talk about why we need to vote in this chamber and why we need to take action. And astoundingly, to the members in the gallery and to you, I'm sure, that imagine that Congress hasn't taken action in over 53 years. 53 years. Richard Nixon was President of the United States the last time Congress enhanced Social Security. Congress is the only body that can do this. The president can't do it through executive order, and it's nothing that the Supreme Court is going to take up. Only members of this institution can help out people. There are more than 70 million Social Security recipients in the country today. And, Mr. Speaker, more than 10,000 baby boomers a day become eligible for Social Security. And we haven't enhanced a benefit for them in over 53 years. Now, the Republican Study Committee has come up with a plan. They say what we need to do is cut $1.5 trillion out of Social Security over the next 10 years. And they say they want to raise the age. Well, Mr. Speaker, as you know, for every year you raise the age, that's a 7% cut in benefits. So raising the age to 70 is a 21% across-the-board cut to people that haven't had a benefit enhancement since 1971. I don't know how that makes any sense, given the needs of our senior citizens and also, quite frankly, given the needs of our children. And also, and you should take note of this, that more veterans rely on Social Security disability than they do on the VA. That's why we've proposed Social Security 2100. Enhance Social Security across the board for everyone. Let no one work all their lives and retire into poverty. More than 5.5 million people currently who have paid into Social Security, work all their lives, get below poverty level checks from the United States government.
That is unfair, that's unjust, that's wrong, and Congress needs to take action. If you just want to say how much you like Social Security, but you don't have a plan and you don't want to vote, then you're not doing anything for Social Security and you're content with its cuts. If you want a study commission that some have said, what is it that you're going to study? What is it that you don't know about the last 51 years? People pretty clearly at home on their kitchen tables know Congress needs to act and enhance Social Security and increase the benefits that haven't been given to them in more than 53 years. It's outrageous. More Americans need to know about it, but Congress needs to act. The Ways and Means Committee has cognizance over Social Security. We should be taking this out. If you've got a better idea than our plan to enhance Social Security, by all means, bring it out. By all means, let's have a debate on it. But for God's sake, don't we owe the American people a vote? Aren't they entitled to know where their members of Congress stand, what their plan is? Now, Mr. Speaker, it might amaze you to know how many people in your district. You have over 193,000 recipients of Social Security in your district. And that brings in $324 million monthly to your constituents. Where do they spend that money? Right back in the district, at the local pharmacy, at the local grocery store, paying for their rent, their mortgages, putting gas in their automobile. This is one of the best economic development programs that every member of Congress benefits from, and their constituents as well. It's long overdue for the United States Congress to act. All we're asking for is to put out your plan and have a vote. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I arise today to talk about the nation's #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly and the #1 anti-poverty program for our children. That program, Mr. Speaker, as you know, is Social Security. Mr. Speaker, and for the members in the gallery, I think it's important to understand the statistics that we're dealing with. Most importantly, that there are now close to 70 million Americans that rely on Social Security. 70 million Americans, 40% of whom, for a pension, that is the only benefit that they have. Testimony to the genius of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and what's required in an entrepreneurial capitalistic system, that there be a safety net for people. Even more so, imagine that 10,000 baby boomers a day become eligible for Social Security. And dishearteningly, Congress, the institution primarily responsible for Social Security's enhancement and protection, has not done anything in 53 years. Richard Nixon was the President of the United States the last time Social Security was enhanced. Now, and for 5 million Americans, 5 million of our fellow citizens get below poverty level checks from Social Security, the greatest insurance program in the nation's history, but Congress has not attended to the program. And that's why this is so vitally important that we do so. Mr. Speaker, as you know, in Idaho, in the 1st District, there are 219,000 plus Social Security recipients, 170,000 plus who are retirees, 21,000 who get disability. There are 10,000 plus widows, 5,600 spouses, 11,000 children in Idaho who rely on Social Security. It brings into the first district $388 million monthly and has not been adjusted in more than 50 years. This is an outrage. And when members learn of this, and when the public is aware of this, they say, and why hasn't Congress acted? President Biden has suggested, and it makes sense, that, hey, listen, in this great nation of ours, why shouldn't everybody pay the same? So he said, let's just simply lift the cap on people making over $400,000 that don't pay nearly the same that a person making $30,000 or $50,000 or $75,000 or $100,000 who pay into the program. And in doing so, we would be able to enhance Social Security, not only in Idaho, but across the entire United States. Even former President Trump now is apparently changing the Republican platform to say we're going to protect Social Security. It's not enough to protect Social Security. Congress hasn't done anything in more than 53 years. So that means whether you're in Idaho or whether you're in Connecticut, those very citizens, those 10,000 a day baby boomers who expect their Congress to take action on their behalf, need to enhance a program that provides them with the benefits. And that money goes directly into every congressional district and every congressional community. And where do the citizens spend that money? At the grocery store, at the pharmacy, at the gas station. It goes to the essential needs that Americans require. That's why Social Security is the #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly, and also the #1 anti-poverty program for children. What Congress needs to do is not talk about it, it needs to vote. Citizens in the gallery and across this nation should demand that the United States Congress vote on Social Security and correct something that's gone in disrepair for more than 50 years. I yield back.
Gentleman yields.